If you could please join me now in welcoming Staff Specialist Dr. David Keller and his friend Scott, who will be assisting with the presentation today. Dr. Kellet is a local rehabilitation consultant who works closely with patients and their families to enable independence and improve their function following a brain tumour diagnosis. Thank you, Dr. Kellet.
I'm not a venturalist. Is this working? Yeah. So firstly, thanks for the invitation to speak. As was mentioned, I've brought my mate Scott along with me. Scott and I have been friends for about the last 10 years or so. Mainly through our kids that have been in primary school together. Scott's kindly joined us today to talk about his experience with brain tumour and rehabilitation. And I'll let him introduce himself in a sec. So apologies if this is hard to read from where you're sitting, but I'll go through it. So in terms of the talk today, we're just going to go through some quick introductions firstly. Secondly, just try and locate rehabilitation in the context of health more broadly. And we've just heard a great talk from Craig, focusing on, sort of more pointy end medical stuff, but we'll take a bit of a broader view. And then look specifically at Scott's lived experience of brain tumour, which hopefully will probably resonate with at least some of you in the audience. So I might let Scott introduce himself. And,
Hi everyone, I'm Scotty Nash. Where do I start? At the very beginning? I've been dealing with my benign cancer tumours for nearly 20 years now. I've had 5 operations, and pretty much all of the first 4 were very similar, firstly I had no symptoms and was found by accident. I had a scan done for a sore ear and boom, there it was. It was about the size of a golf ball, and it was benign, but we didn't know how fast it was growing. Had it removed, and it's turned into a system of every several years, or it's on 4 or 5 years, it's popped. It seems to keep coming back. And I've been able to have the operations have it removed. And for the first 4 times over the first 18 years or so, I do 6 weeks at home, watch TV, go back to work, totally as I was before. But this last one, because of it's been number 5 and so much work has been done, there was quite a noticeable effect. And so the last op was 12 months ago. And so I've had 12 months to recover during this crazy crisis. So that's why I actually booked my operation, and it was like, this is a good time to get it done because I can stay at home. Because I had time, there's no rush on it. I just thought, okay, this is perfect. And I waited a couple of months and did it. And then the disaster happened and I lost my job because I lost my driver's license. And I also lost my memory. I was also way different to the first 4 times. So I completely lost my memory. I still don't remember my children's birthdays. I remember my father's birthday because it's New Year's Day, and I remember my wife's birthday because it's Australia Day. And I know my kids' names, but these things they're sad, but they're not as important as the people that are around. And I also want to state how impressive it is that Newcastle can do something like this, because as you all know, you can be wherever you live and you can be quite lonely with your tumour. And I found that the first few years was, I didn't know who to talk to, because I wasn't getting any therapy or any help after my op. I was healing and going back to work, so I had no one to talk to about my crazy thing that was growing in my head, crushing my brain. And that would, it's a lonesome world. So to be here with all of you and to also go to where Dave works was fantastic to get the understanding and the help and the care.
Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just give a bit of an overview of where rehabilitation sits in the health system more broadly, and then we'll talk a little bit more with Scott about his experience of rehabilitation, particularly over the last 12 months. So the health system, as a lot of you will have experienced, can be pretty overwhelming. There's lots of different moving parts in terms of different systems and services that can be involved that make up the health system more broadly. But if we simplify it, if you've got a health condition, you may be in a situation where it can be cured. You have a little skin cancer, your doctor whips it out, you get on with your life, that's it. Unfortunately though, a lot of situations in healthcare, there isn't a cure for things. Then we're looking at, maybe secondary prevention. So you have a disease or a disorder, and there might be some management that can try and keep things at bay, or prevent other problems happening with that condition. There might be situations where you prevent something happening in the first place. So seatbelts are a great example of a primary prevention health strategy. My area of interest is in rehabilitation. So sometimes we can't cure, we can't prevent, but we can look at aspects of rehabilitation where we're really trying to look at the person's, life situation and their participation in everyday life, and trying to help a person become as independent as they can. And then coupled with those other three strategies that we can use in health, support is also another really, fundamental health strategy that health professionals can assist people with certain situations. So if we unpack the idea of rehabilitation a little bit more, the World Health Organization have two main health classifications. One is a disease classification, so it might be cancer, stroke, melanoma, urinary tract infection, big lists of diseases. But in the last 20 years, the WHO have introduced a new classification called the International Classification of Functioning Disability in Health. And on the screen is the basic model. So up the top, the health condition or disease that a person might have. On the left of the screen, the idea of body functions and structures.
Testing. Is that too loud?
Body functions and structures. In the middle, and in the middle we've got activities, so the tasks that we all engage in to get through the day. Might be sitting, standing, scratching your nose, whatever. And then across the concept of participation or involvement in a life situation, which is a fairly broad concept. And then we've got the idea of environmental factors that can then influence this system. So it might be products and technology, or attitudes, or support and relationships, those sorts of things. And then also we bring in our personal factors to help us, complete that picture. So as a quick example, if we look at the health condition being a brain tumour, then that might lead to, for example, a change in a body structure or body function, leading to double vision, for example. that might then lead to difficulty performing a particular activity like driving. And as a result of that, if your life situation is that you've got to pick kids up from school and you can't drive the car because you've got double vision, because of your brain tumour, then that's an issue. So we've got, the RMS says, well, sorry, you've got double vision, you can't drive. And then for each individual, that's going to have an implication in terms of how, from a personal perspective, that influences them and how they're able to respond and adapt or react to that situation. So if we take a rehabilitation approach, we can think of, for example, and this is a simple example, where we can use a product and technology if it's just this isolated problem of double vision, where we, after a certain period of time, a month or so, if you adapt to using a single eye, then, and you've got an occluder on a pair of glasses, then from the RMS's perspective, you can get back to driving. And as a result, you can then engage in that participation role and pick up the kids, which is the end game in this situation. So we haven't cured anything, we haven't prevented anything, but we've worked around a problem to find an appropriate solution. So, Scott's given us a little bit of an introduction already about his situation with having his tumour diagnosis initially in the nearly sort of 20 years ago, and I think that first up you had an opinion and that you couldn't have an operation, and then it was about a year or so later you had your surgery, and like you said, 6 weeks or so off work, and then back to normal, back to your role in sales,
and then just see what happens next.
Yeah. And that's Scott's ugly note from 20 years ago.
That's like 18 years ago, 19 years ago. It's first off. That's the next day. That's ouch.
And I think you had a mate who was a professional photographer.
Yeah, he owned a camera store and he came round and took a photo of me. And I got a big colour line home. So, yeah, he's a bit of a crazy one. But yeah, that was next day.
And then as Scott mentioned before, he's had subsequent 4 other surgeries, so looks like every sort of 5 or so years.
Like this is sort of growing. It's, what do you call it? I can't remember the words. It's
A low grade.
low grade, yeah. So it just returned and grew and then was removed safely, and once again, just 6 weeks off, back to work, driving all over the place, selling what I was selling. And, pretty much the same pattern throughout the same 4 surgeries, and that was fine. Was uninjured, had carried no other problems, no other damage. I recovered quite well.
And the process was just sort of like a MRI every year or 2, meet the neurosurgeon, and then the neurosurgeon would say, yep, it's time to...
It started off with every 6 months, and then we worked out at 12 months it was fine in time. Yeah, and then we just do the MRI, and then we pick a time that was suit and just get it done.
Right. And then...
June last year.
So that's surgery number 5 for Scott. Just nearly 12 months ago.
Yeah, nearly exactly 12 months ago.
So Scott's alluded to, or spoken already a little bit about some of the changes after this 5th surgery that he had 12 months ago. So I don't know, Scott, if you want to go through those.
Oh, yeah.
I think the first one, just some memory changes that you've touched on already.
So initially when I woke from my surgery, which is the same as every other time, that day I woke up feeling sort of okay, but my memory was completely gone. my wife's over there, but she was standing in the bed. I didn't know who she was. And it all sort of came back fairly quickly, her information, but it was definitely became obvious that there was a memory problem. And then it had to be basically, we had to work out what it was and how it was, or if we, what the damage, where I was with my post-op. And then it became obvious that I was suffering from fatigue due to the operation, which I still do. I still have to pretty much come home every day and I'll crash out for like anywhere between 1 to 3 hours, between sort of 1 to 2 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll just pass out. And that's it's very, very good thing, because like that's one of the things that I've had to learn is if I'm tired, go to bed, because you're not going to fix it by racking down a can of Coke, or it's not going to work. If my brain says I'm tired, it gets to sleep. And when I wake up, usually I feel unreal. Sometimes I'm a bit foggy, but I have to do it, and that's all there is to it. And you can feel that energy, like you've recharged the battery. And like I say to so many people, you can flatten on batteries, but it takes as long as 5 these days instead of 1 to recharge. It takes time, so you've got to be careful with your health. And the mood effects, it was the other thing too. I was very up and down and very crashy and fall, and eventually it became obvious that I was suffering from post-operative. I was suffering from some fairly intense depression. And once I got that checked out by my GP, we just went to a mild antidepressant drug and it worked perfectly. I was very lucky with that. It was the first thing I got dosed with. It stopped the blues. And once that stopped, life definitely improved because I wasn't feeling so bad. And then I had, not long after the op, I was having headaches with the fluid, and it became obvious that we had to put tapping and a lead going down to just let the pressure off the brain. Whenever it got the pressure up, it had to flow, because after 5 ops, it just couldn't do that itself. Sometimes it can happen after your first, so I was lucky to go for 5. And once that was fixed, then my headaches went away and my dizziness. So that was good. And but I lost my driver's license due to the fact that I was having seizures. And I got my driver's license back, which is also incredible, because I went for quite a while there where I couldn't drive the kids around. And we've actually got young kids there, 15 and 10, so you've got netball, soccer, school. That was tough. So, yeah, they're all the things that we went through, and they're, as you all know, they're hard work. They're not easy, and when they pop up like depression, I didn't know what it was. I was just, why can't I stop crying? So it's, the good thing about where Dave works as well is once I went there, everyone understands exactly what's going on when you speak. And that's the other thing about here, like I said before, is everyone here understands what I'm talking about. Because you can talk to people that don't know what it is, they don't really understand. You can talk all day, but they won't get it. And you can get stuck. You can get stuck at the shop, and they don't understand why you can't remember what you're trying to say. So that's a good thing.
Great, thanks, Steve.
So in terms of rehabilitation interventions, and as Scott mentioned, I work at, sometimes meet people in intensive care at the John Hunter, then might see people on the neurosurgical ward at John Hunter Hospital. I then might be involved in their care at Rankin Park Centre, which is the inpatient rehabilitation units on site at the John Hunter Hospital, and then I also work at the Hunter Brain Injury Service, which is part of Hunter New England Health, based in at Bar Beach, where if people need a bit of a hand making that transition from hospital to home, then we can be involved with rehabilitation there in certain circumstances. There's also other outpatient rehab services that operate through Rankin Park Centre as well. So in terms of rehabilitation interventions, Scott, as he said, had some input at the Hunter Brain Injury Service after the last surgery with some of the things that he's talked about. Do you want me to run through this? Or
Yeah,
do you want to
go
go
for it.
through that? Yeah.
There you go.
So in terms of the memory stuff. Scott had some input from an occupational therapist, and I think that you've got a pretty good system now in terms of diaries, iPhone, notebook.
Yeah.
But,
Stick to it.
yeah.
Yeah. Which also helps your memory. It feels like it's growing, but maintaining information and not forget.
Yeah.
Quite simple.
Yeah.
Which I was doing, I was forgetting.
Yeah. So in terms of occupational therapy, that's really a focus to again work around a problem that you can't fix, but use different strategies to help you, kick the goals that you want to kick. The second box there is physical reconditioning. So I think that was also a big thing. You talked about physical fatigue and just getting back on your feet and getting moving again was a...
Definitely. And one of the things that came from where you worked there was the girls, a couple of trainers got me and put me on a set of weights and said, just keep doing this, because I said I need to be able to paddle out because I wanted to go surfing again. I had no power. I'd lost all my sort of power, and they showed me how to get strong again and get my core strength back again, and things like that. And regular walking too.
And I guess that's one of the key things about rehabilitation is that we try and make things goal-oriented. So as Scott mentioned, one of his goals was to get back in the water and do some surfing. And so the physical reconditioning, was targeted at that end goal and activity that then leads to that participation opportunity of being involved in a particular life situation, that was relevant for Scott. The third box there is cognitive assessment, and we've got a couple of neuropsychologists that work at the Hunter Brain Injury Service, and as Scott's already talked about, that was helpful for informing decisions about readiness to get back on the road for driving, and then also just to help clarify some of the strengths and weaknesses in terms of cognitive function as you come out of that.
The level of injury.
Yeah.
Understanding of actual damage or the injury. Right.
Scott's also talked earlier just about, in terms of the last box, mood and adjustment, and that's really a combination of input from our clinical psychology people and also medical people. So, and I think leading on to the next box, just in terms of coordination of care, Scott had a case manager at the Brain Injury Service and then also had a fantastic working relationship with his GP.
That's great.
Yeah, and I think the GP's been good also in terms of liaising with your neurosurgeon
Yeah,
and
totally.
sorting things out there. One of the things I think that Scott hasn't mentioned but found particularly useful is that from the Brain Injury Service, Scott was referred on to a group called Synapse, which is a brain impairment peer support group. That's a national Australian organisation, and you found that
It's awesome.
useful?
Yeah, well, I got to meet other patients with all sorts of other injuries through their setup, but it was through my carrier, which was Damien, who is a previous customer of the injured person, who's got himself back to work, and it's inspiring for me to get off my butt, get back out there and see what I can do with myself. Great guy, but he understands exactly what I'm talking about because he's been through it.
So peer support's important. I think Scott's talked to me a lot about informal rehabilitation and support that he's had just from mates, and Scott was telling me, or do you want to talk about, we've got a friend, Jane, who's actually a high school teacher, and I think she would just drop around, pick Scott up and go for a drive, and in terms of the memory thing, just get you to describe where you were going.
Yeah, she's a neighbour who's a buddy, and she just turned up like once a week and go, jump in the Hilux, we're going for a spin. So in our neighbourhood, there's several people like that in our neighbourhood. who were like cooking us food, and my wife was a lot to do with that. So yeah, she was really cool. She'd just take us for a spin and go, let's go to Stockton, and get me out of the house and talk.
The last box on the slide just relates to vocational rehabilitation, and as Scott said, he was working in construction, hire stuff, and sales prior to his last surgery 12 months ago, but then was unable to get to that role, and you've had a goal of getting back into the workforce. So I don't know if you want to have a quick chat about where you're up to with that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so only about I think it's exactly a week ago, I just started my return to work training, and so through the people that came off Dave's work, Green Light. So they deal with people who've got injuries like or situations like me. And once I told them all about who I was and what I do, and that I'd spent the last 20 years playing in rock and roll bands and touring, and it was all our own material, and we wrote, and I was a bass player and I was a guitarist, and she was like, "Well, I got something for you," and straight away she rang the Vibe place, which is used to be a teaching school for kids with rock and roll, and it's closed because of the disease, I'd say. But it's been bought out, and it's now used for educating anyone with any sort of brain damage or brain injury and whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is. You can go there if you want to do arts, craft or music. And it's run by musicians. And I turned up, and I'm now teaching kids how to play bass, and I'm actually a student. I'm not actually working there. So I'm going, give me a job. But it's an amazing place in its own right as well, because the people they're there because they want to be there, and that's one of the great things about the new system that we have, that has got so many different carers in so many different ways, and that's given me inspiration to go back and see what I can do with myself in some other way, and it's a great surprise. So we'll see what happens with that, but it was a blast. Thank you.
And I think we've covered off most of these already, but in terms of rehabilitation outcomes, or the goals that Scott's been working to, he's been able to get back into water surfing, got back to driving, has had a focus on relationships and working through the impact of your tumour in terms of family relationships, personal relationships. Scott's already talked about the aspects of mood that he's had addressed, fatigue strategies that he now puts in place, as well as those memory strategies and organisation strategies we talked about. And then moving forward with vocational rehabilitation in terms of opportunities for getting back to work. And I think the key thing that we've talked about in preparing for this was really just coming to a point of acceptance for a lot of these changes over the last 12 months.
I felt quite strange. It takes a little while to accept the changes and roll with them and try and do your best with them. Yeah, that's right. It's a bit of a shock. It's because it's like that. But also I want to say about the relationships part as well, because my family's had some care, because we've all suffered, and my children are 15 and 10, and their dad's a little different, things aren't the same, and my wife's working really hard, she's doing everything and stressing, and we've gone together for counselling as a family, which has been phenomenal, because we were collapsing, we're all burnt out, my wife's cooked, I was really cooked. I mean, if I sound good now, you should have seen me a few months ago, I wouldn't have been able to stand it. And so that counselling that our family got has been priceless, and it was provided through the education system, through university, where we get to work. So that part of life is really, really priceless. That can take the pressure off your family or yourself, and that was a big change for us, just to get that help.
Great, thanks. So thanks for listening.
Thank you.